Hey guys, tonight we begin with the shadows of the season. We usually think of December as a time of warmth, of glittering lights, and the gentle chiming of bells. But long before the commercial holidays we know today, winter was a time of deep, encroaching darkness. It was a season when the sun vanished early, when the cold could kill, and the things waiting in the woods felt much closer to the front door. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what the weather is like outside your window tonight. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us from the snowy corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. For most of us, the Christmas season is defined by a singular, benevolent figure, a jolly man in red who rewards goodness with gifts. But the ancient world understood that the universe relies on balance. There cannot be light without shadow. There cannot be reward without the threat of punishment. And there cannot be a Saint Nicholas without a monster to walk in his footsteps. In the frozen valleys of the Austrian Alps centuries ago, the villagers did not look out their windows on the eve of December 5th, hoping to see reindeer. They locked their doors. They huddled closer to the hearth fire, listening to the wind howling through the pines, straining their ears for a specific, terrifying sound. Not the jingle of silver bells, but the heavy, rhythmic clanking of rusty chains dragging through the snow. This was the night of the Krampusnacht. While modern Christmas is a celebration of joy, the folklore of the Alpine regions held on to a darker, older truth. They believed that good behavior wasn't just expected, it had to be enforced. And the enforcer was not a man, but a beast. Krampus is perhaps the most famous of the winter monsters, the dark twin of Saint Nicholas. But to understand him, you have to strip away the kitschy horror movies of today and step back into the mindset of a medieval peasant, living in a wooden hut surrounded by miles of black, snow-choked forest. To them, Krampus was as real as the cold itself. He was described as a towering, hairy beast standing on the legs of a goat with cloven hooves that left ominous prints in the fresh powder. He had the horns of a demon curling from his forehead and a long, pointed tongue that lolled out of a mouth filled with fangs. His body was covered in matted black or brown fur, smelling of wet animal musk and sulfur, a scent that would hit you before you even saw him emerging from the blizzard. The origins of Krampus go back far deeper than Christianity, reaching into the pre-Germanic pagan traditions, where the line between the spirit world and the human world was thin during the winter solstice. The people of the mountains believed that as the sun retreated and the nights grew their longest, spirits walked the earth. Some were benevolent, bringing the promise of spring. Others were wild, chaotic, and hungry. When the church began to spread through the Alps, they couldn't simply erase these ancient fears, so they adapted them. They paired the wild, horned entity with the kindly Saint Nicholas. The two became an inseparable pair, representing the ultimate duality of the season. Nicholas, the bishop, with his golden staff and bag of treats, represented divine grace. Krampus, the beast, represented earthly consequence. Imagine the scene in a 17th century village. It is the evening of December 5th. The snow is falling heavily, muffling all sound outside. Suddenly, the silence is broken by a commotion in the street. The door to your cottage bursts open. First enters St. Nicholas, calm and serene, asking the children if they have been dutiful, if they have said their prayers. The children, wide-eyed and trembling, answer him. If they have been good, they receive an orange, some nuts, or dried fruit. But lurking in the doorway, just behind the saint's flowing robes, is the shadow. Krampus does not speak, he growls. He rackles the chains he carries, which are said to symbolize the binding of the devil by the church. But in that moment, in the flickering candlelight, he doesn't look bound. He looks ready to strike. In his hand, he carries a bundle of birch branches, known as the rooten. In modern times, we might joke about getting coal in our stockings, a passive disappointment, but the threat of Krampus was active and physical. The rooten was used to swat naughty children, a sharp, stinging reminder that disobedience had a price. But the birch branches were not the most terrifying tool in his arsenal. Strapped to the monster's back was a large, woven basket or a wooden tub. In the darkest versions of the legend, this wasn't just for carrying supplies, it was for carrying children. The lore whispered that if a child had been truly wicked, beyond the help of a mere swatting, Krampus would stuff them into his basket, carry them off into the dark forest, and take them to his lair, from which they would never return. It was a brutal story told to ensure obedience, a way for parents to keep order during the long, claustrophobic months of winter. "Be good," they would whisper, "or the Dark One will take you." Even today, the tradition survives in the Krampuslauf, or Krampus Run. In towns across Austria, Germany, and Slovenia, men dress in elaborate, terrifying costumes, carved from wood and covered in sheepskin. They roam the streets, drinking schnapps, ringing cowbells, and chasing spectators with birch switches. It is a chaotic, adrenaline-fueled release of energy in the dead of winter, a way to personify the darkness, and, by becoming the monster, perhaps control it. But there is a psychological weight to Krampus that goes beyond the costume. He represents the anxiety of the season. Winter is a time when resources are scarce, when survival was historically difficult. It was a time when social cohesion was vital. You couldn't afford to have people acting out, being selfish, or breaking the rules of the community. The monster was a manifestation of that social pressure. He was the embodiment of the fear that if we are not good, if we do not hold the line of civilization, the wild chaos of nature will consume us. St. Nicholas offers the carrot, the hope of reward. Krampus offers the stick, the fear of retribution. And in the medieval mind, fear was often a much stronger motivator than hope. The image of Krampus with his lolling tongue and goat eyes serves as the gatekeeper to our list of monsters. He is the most human adjacent of them all, a creature that walks into our homes. But as we move away from the safety of the hearth and deeper into the frozen wilderness, we find that Krampus is not alone. There are things far older, far larger, and far hungrier waiting in the snow. While Krampus might take a bad child away, our next entity doesn't want to kidnap you. She doesn't care if you've been polite or rude. She is a giantess who lives in a cave of ice, stirring a cauldron that is never full, waiting for the lazy and the unprepared to cross her path. We leave the Alps now and travel north, across the freezing sea to the volcanic island of Iceland, where the Christmas season isn't just about bells and holly, but about surviving the mother of all nightmares. If the Alps felt cold, then Iceland is a frozen otherworld entirely. Imagine a landscape of jagged black volcanic rock buried under feet of snow. The wind here doesn't just howl, it screams across the glaciers. In the depths of winter, the sun barely rises at all. It skirts the horizon for a few hours of grey twilight before plunging the island back into 20 hours of darkness. It is here, in this land of fire and ice, that our next monster waits. Her name is Grýla. While Krampus is a servant, bound by chains and answering to a saint, Grýla answers to no one. She is an ogress, a giantess, a creature older than the Vikings who first settled these shores. She does not punish children to teach them a lesson. She punishes them because she is hungry. In Icelandic folklore, Grýla is the ultimate boogeyman. She lives deep in the mountains, in a cave hidden by storms and magic, alongside her husband, Lepaludi. But while he is lazy and stays by the fire, Grýla is driven by an insatiable appetite. The descriptions of her vary, but they are always nightmarish. She is said to be a giant, towering over men and houses alike. Her skin is gnarled and warty, resembling the rough bark of an ancient tree or the mossy stone of the cliffs. Some legends say she has hooves instead of feet, clattering on the frozen earth. Others claim she has 15 tails, each one knotted and tangled with 100 sacks of misery tied to them. But her eyes are what you must watch out for. They are said to be located in the back of her head, or perhaps she has eyes all over, so she can see in every direction, spotting the movement of a disobedient child miles away in the valley below. When the snow falls thickest and the Christmas season approaches, Grýla descends. She grabs her massive sack made of rough, coarse burlap and begins her hunt. Krampus carries a switch to sting you. Grýla carries a pot to boil you. Her legend is visceral and terrifyingly simple. She hunts for children who have been naughty, those who cry too much, those who refuse to eat their dinner, or those who wander too far from the safety of the farmhouse. Unlike St. Nicholas, who keeps a list of the good, Grýla has an uncanny ability to sense the bad. She can hear a child throwing a tantrum from the peaks of the glaciers. And when she hears it, she starts walking. When she arrives at a village, she doesn't knock. She stalks through the streets, peering into windows with her terrible eyes. If she finds a victim, she snatches them up, stuffs them into her sack, and throws them over her massive shoulder. There is no coal. There is no warning. There is only the sack. She carries her catch back up the mountain to her icy lair. There, a giant cauldron sits over a fire that never goes out. Grýla's favorite meal is a stew made of naughty children. It is a gruesome, primal fear, the fear of being consumed. For centuries, this story was so terrifying to the children of Iceland that in the 18th century, a public decree was actually issued banning parents from using Grýla to threaten their children. The fear was simply too great. It was traumatizing a generation. But folklore is stubborn. You cannot legislate away a monster that lives in the dark corners of the cultural mind. Grýla remained, lurking in the stories told by candlelight, a reminder of the harshness of the world outside. Her husband, Lepaludi, serves as a strange comedic relief to her horror. He is described as a troll, but a pathetic one. lazy, slow, and usually waiting for Grýla to bring home dinner rather than hunting himself. They are a grotesque parody of a domestic couple, bickering in their cave while the pot boils. But Grýla represents something very real to the people of the north. In historical Iceland, winter was a siege. Famine was a constant companion. If you were lazy, if you were wasteful, if you didn't listen to your elders, the consequences weren't just a spanking. The consequences were death. Grýla is the personification of the winter famine. She is the hunger that comes down from the mountains when the stores are low. She is the darkness that swallows the weak. By telling her story, parents weren't just scaring their kids, they were trying to keep them alive. Stay inside, they said. Be quiet. Don't draw attention to yourself. Because in the Arctic winter, anything that draws attention gets eaten. She is also the mother of the Yule lads, 13 mischievous trolls who descend on towns in the days leading up to Christmas to steal food and slam doors. But while her sons are pranksters, Grýla remains a killer. Yet, she is not the only thing living in that mountain cave. Grýla keeps a pet, a creature that prowls the snow alongside her, but hunts for a very different reason. While Grýla hunts the naughty, this beast hunts the poor. It doesn't care if you've been kind. It doesn't care if you've said your prayers. It only checks one thing. Are you wearing new clothes? If you aren't, then you are prey. We move now from the giantess to the predator at her heels, a beast that turns the joy of a new Christmas outfit into a matter of life and death. When we think of cats in winter, we imagine them curled up by the fireplace, purring softly, a symbol of domestic comfort. We think of small, warm creatures that seek our affection. But in the frozen highlands of Iceland, the cat is not a pet, it is a predator. Lurking in the shadow of Grýla the giantess, prowling through the snowdrifts with silent, terrifying grace, is the Yule Cat, the Yule Cat. This is not a house cat. In the folklore, it is described as a beast towering over the tallest rooftops, a monster of immense proportions, with fur as black as the midnight sky and whiskers sharp as steel wire. Its eyes are said to be balls of pale yellow fire, glowing in the darkness of the Arctic night, scanning the windows of every farmhouse. But unlike a normal predator, the Yule Cat isn't looking for movement. It isn't looking for the smell of blood. It is looking for fashion. Or, more accurately, it is looking for evidence of your labor. The legend of the Yule Cat is unique among monsters because its trigger is so incredibly specific. It doesn't hunt the naughty. It doesn't hunt the wicked. It hunts those who have not received a new piece of clothing for Christmas. To the modern ear, this sounds absurd. A monster that eats you because you didn't get a new pair of socks. It sounds like the ultimate enforcement of consumerism. But in the harsh reality of medieval Iceland, this rule was rooted in survival. Iceland was, and is, a land of sheep. For centuries, the economy and survival of the people depended entirely on wool. Processing wool, shearing, carding, spinning and weaving was a colossal task that took the entire year. It was the industry that kept the family fed and clothed against the lethal cold. Every member of the household, from the oldest grandmother to the youngest child, had to work to process the autumn wool harvest before the depths of winter set in. It was a race against time. The rule was simple. If the household worked hard, if the spinning wheels turned day and night, and the weaving was finished by Christmas Eve, there would be a reward. Every member of the family, even the servants, would receive a new piece of clothing from the finished cloth. It might just be a pair of mittens or a simple scarf, but it was proof that you had pulled your weight, proof that you had contributed to the survival of the group. But if you were lazy, if you shirked your duties, the wool would not be finished. There would be no new clothes to give. You would be left wearing the rags of the previous year. And that is what the cat is looking for. On Christmas Eve, the Yule Cat descends from the mountains. It peers through the frosted glass of the cottage windows. It looks at the family gathered round the table. It checks the clothes on their backs. If it sees the fresh weave of new wool, it moves on. You are safe. You have worked hard. But if it sees only old, tattered rags, it knows. It knows you did not finish your work. It knows you are a burden on the winter stores. And the punishment is absolute. The Yule Cat does not scratch. It does not hiss. It smashes through the door or reaches a massive paw down the chimney and consumes the lazy one whole. In some softer versions of the tale, the cat merely eats the person's Christmas dinner, leaving them to starve. But in the older, darker tellings, the person becomes the dinner. It is a terrifying incentive for productivity. Imagine being a child in a candlelight farmhouse, your fingers bleeding from working the wool, tired, exhausted, but too afraid to stop, because outside, in the howling wind, you can hear the heavy, muffled thud of giant paws circling the house. You are not working for a gift. You are working to make yourself inedible. Like Grýla, the Yule Cat is a manifestation of the anxiety of winter. In a subsistent society, laziness wasn't just a character flaw, it was a threat to the community. If the wool wasn't processed, there was no money and no warmth. The monster was the enforcement mechanism, ensuring that everyone, even the children, contributed to the collective survival. It turns the joy of a Christmas gift into a grim necessity. Receiving socks for Christmas is a cliché disappointment today, but to an ancient Icelander, those socks were a shield against a monster. They were a badge of life. The Yule Cat remains one of the most unique and visually striking monsters of the season, a towering black feline judging you by your wardrobe. It reminds us that in the old world, everything had a price, even the clothes on your back. But as we leave the frozen north and the realm of giants and beasts, we move south into the dark forests of the French-German border. Here the monsters change. They stop being mythical creatures born of nature and start looking like something far more disturbing. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't animals, they aren't demons, they are men. Men who have lost their souls and return from the grave to hunt the innocent. Our next legend takes us to the Alsace region to meet a figure so feared that he was once a real living tyrant before he became the nightmare known as Hans Trap.
We leave the snowy peaks of the north and descend into the dense, ancient woodlands of the Alsace region, on the border of France and Germany. Here, the villages look like they have been plucked from a fairy tale. Half-timbered houses, cobblestone streets, and smoke rising gently from stone chimneys. It is the picture of Christmas charm. But the locals know that fairy tales in this part of the world rarely have happy endings. In the folklore of Alsace, Saint Nicholas does not travel alone. He is accompanied by a figure that is not a beast, not a troll, and not a demon. He is something far worse. He is a man. His name is Hans Trapp. Unlike Krampus, who was born of ancient pagan nature spirits, Hans Trapp was born of human cruelty. The legend is based on a real man, a 15th century knight named Hans von Trotha. In life, he was a wealthy, powerful, and ruthless lord who terrorized the region. He taxed the peasants into starvation, waged private wars against the church, and ruled his lands with an iron fist. But as he grew older, the legend says his vanity turned into madness. He didn't just want power, he wanted immortality, and he was willing to make a deal with the devil to get it. The stories claim that Hans turned to the dark arts. He performed rituals in the deep woods, sacrificing animals, and eventually craving something more potent. He developed a taste for human flesh. The church, horrified by his crimes and his blasphemy, excommunicated him. They stripped him of his lands, his titles, and his wealth. He was banished from society, cast out to rot in the forest like a wild animal. But Hans did not die. He merely changed. Driven insane by isolation and hunger, he embraced his new role as a monster. He built a makeshift shack in the darkest part of the woods, a place where the sunlight never touched the ground. And there he began to hunt. But he couldn't just walk into a village as a knight anymore. He needed a disguise. He needed camouflage. So he stuffed his clothes with straw. He tied burlap sacks around his limbs. He placed a ragged hat upon his head. He became a living scarecrow. Imagine being a child in the 15th century, walking along the edge of the forest to gather firewood. You see a figure standing motionless in the field, ragged and still, a scarecrow, placed there to frighten the birds. You think nothing of it. You turn your back, and then you hear the rustle of dry straw moving behind you. The legend of Hans Trapp is terrifying because of this deception. He is the ambush predator of Christmas. He waits, perfectly still, until his prey is within reach. Then the scarecrow lunges. The most famous story of his terror involves a young shepherd boy. The boy was walking past Hans's lair, unaware of the history of the woods. Hans Trapp, disguised in his straw and rags, snatched the boy. He didn't beat him, he didn't lecture him. He dragged him back to his shack, and he began to sharpen a knife. The story goes that Hans Trapp sliced the boy into pieces and roasted him over a fire, eager to break his fast. He sat down at his table, napkin in hand, ready to consume the innocent child. But just as he raised the first bite to his lips, the heavens opened. A bolt of lightning, sent directly from God, tore through the roof of the shack. It struck Hans Trapp dead instantly, burning him to ash and denying him his final, gruesome meal. It was divine intervention, a smiting of pure evil. The boy, in some versions of the tale, was miraculously restored to life. In others, he was avenged but lost. But death was not the end for Hans Trapp.
His spirit was too heavy with sin to ascend, and too feared to be accepted even by hell itself. So he returned. He wanders the Alsace region to this day, on the nights leading up to Christmas. He is no longer a flesh-and-blood cannibal, but a spectral boogeyman, still dressed in his scarecrow rags.
In the modern traditions of the region, Hans Trapp serves as another distinct, dark companion to St. Nicholas. But unlike Krampus, who is wild and chaotic, Hans Trapp is menacing and human. He appears in parades, a towering figure dressed in black or ragged brown, with a white beard that looks wild and unkempt. He carries a whip and chains. When he asks children if they have been good, it isn't a question, it's a threat. He represents the fear of the other, the outcast who lives on the fringe of civilization. In a time when obeying the social order was everything, Hans Trapp was the ultimate warning of what happens when you reject your community, your church, and your humanity. You become a hollow man, stuffed with straw, wandering the cold forever. There is something particularly unsettling about him because he isn't a monster from mythology. He isn't a goat. He isn't a giant cat. He is a man who chose darkness. He reminds us that the greatest monsters aren't the ones hiding under the bed, but the ones who once walked among us, in castles and high halls, before their greed consumed them. So if you see a scarecrow standing in a winter field, seemingly out of place in the snow, do not get too close. It might just be straw, or it might be Hans, waiting for his dinner. We leave the dark forests of France now, and travel southeast, to the sun-bleached ruins of Greece. But in winter, the sun offers no protection here. In the Greek Orthodox tradition, the danger doesn't come from a single man or a single giant. It comes from a horde. Deep beneath the earth, thousands of tiny sawing creatures are working tirelessly to destroy the world. And on Christmas Eve, they put down their tools and come up to the surface. Our next monsters are the destroyers of the world tree, the chaotic goblins known as the Kalikantaroi.
When we imagine Greece, we picture white sands, turquoise waters, and the sun-drenched ruins of the Acropolis. It is a land of light and reason, the birthplace of logic. But beneath the earth, in the deepest, blackest caverns where the sun never reaches, logic does not exist, only chaos. According to Greek folklore, the world is held together by a massive, invisible tree, the Axis Mundi, or the Tree of Life. Its roots stretch deep into the underworld, anchoring our reality, keeping the earth from drifting into the void. But there are things down there that want the tree to fall. These are the Kalikantaroi. They are a race of small subterranean goblins, malicious, ugly, and tireless. For 353 days of the year, they have only one job. They surround the trunk of the world tree, armed with saws, axes, and teeth. They cut, and they hack, and they gnaw. Their goal is simple: saw through the tree, destroy the foundation of the earth, and watch the world above collapse into the darkness. Day after day, month after month, they work. They saw until the great trunk is hanging by a single, fragile thread. They are ready for the end. They can taste the destruction. But then, Christmas comes. On December 25th, the birth of Christ occurs.
In the Orthodox tradition, this divine event brings a surge of holy power into the world. It is a time of renewal, and in a miraculous instant, the world tree heals itself. The wood knits back together. The trunk becomes solid and unbreakable once more. The Kalakanzaroi look at their year's work, undone in a second. They are furious. Enraged by the miracle and unable to cut the tree while the holy days last, they abandon their saws. They swarm up through the cracks in the earth, pouring out of caves, wells, and springs. For the 12 days of Christmas, from the Nativity to the Epiphany, they take their revenge on humanity.
The Kalakanzaroi are not imposing giants like Grýla. They are a horde. Descriptions of them vary from village to village, but they are always grotesque. They are usually described as small, black, and hairy, like monkeys mixed with demons. They have long, curved claws, red eyes that burn like coals, and tongues that hang down to their chests. Some are said to have the legs of donkeys, others the arms of apes. They smell of wet fur, sulphur, and stale earth. They are creatures of pure anarchy. They do not want to eat you, at least not usually. They want to ruin you. They roam the countryside at night, looking for open doors or unlit chimneys. If they get into your house, they unleash havoc. They smash furniture. They urinate in the wine and the oil. They sour the milk. They extinguish the hearth fire, leaving the family freezing in the dark. In some frightening tales, they demand piggyback rides from unsuspecting travellers they catch on the road, clinging to their backs with iron grips, forcing the human to carry them until they collapse from exhaustion. They are the embodiment of the chaos that threatens domestic life. Christmas is supposed to be a time of order, of ritual, of family gathering. The Kalakanzaroi are the anti-Christmas. They are the noise, the mess, and the breakdown of civilized behavior. Because they enter through the chimney, many Greek families keep the Yule log, or Christoxyllo, burning for the entire 12 days. A fire that never goes out is the best defense. The goblins are afraid of the flames, and the smoke keeps them from descending the flue. But if you run out of wood, or if the fire dies down while you sleep, they will come down. And once they are inside, they are nearly impossible to catch.
However, the Kalakantaroi have a weakness. They are stupid. They are easily distracted and obsessed with numbers. One of the most famous methods of protection is to leave a colander, a bowl with many small holes on your doorstep. When the goblins arrive, intending to raid your pantry, they see the colander. They are compelled by a strange magical law to count the holes. They start counting. 1, 2, 3. But the Kalakantaroi cannot count past the number 2. The number 3 is holy, the Trinity, and saying it kills them or burns their tongues. So they count 1, 2, and then they get confused. They start over. 1, 2. They will sit on the doorstep, counting and recounting the holes in the colander all night long, until the sun rises. And like all creatures of the dark, they cannot stand the sunlight. When the dawn breaks, they shriek and flee back into the shadows. This invasion lasts until January 6th, the Epiphany, the day of the blessing of the waters. When the priest throws the cross into the water, the Kalakantaroi scream in terror, "Run away! The priest has come with his holy water!" They dive back into their caves, descending deep into the earth. But when they return to the roots of the world tree, they find a tragedy. The tree has completely healed. It is thick and strong again, their work has been erased. And so, with a sigh, they pick up their saws and they begin to cut again. It is a Sisyphean nightmare, a cycle of destruction and renewal that never ends. The Calacantaroi remind us that chaos is always waiting beneath the surface, kept at bay only by our rituals and our fires. But as we leave the chaotic goblins of the Mediterranean, we return to the cold, crisp air of the Alps. We travel back to Austria and Germany to meet a figure who is far more precise than the goblins. She doesn't want to break your furniture. She wants to check your spinning wheel. And if she isn't satisfied with your work, she has a very specific surgical punishment in mind. Our next monster is the Witch of the 12 Days, the Belly Slitter. Her name is Frau Perchta.
We return to the snowy valleys of Austria and Bavaria, where the winter nights are long and the silence of the farmhouse is heavy. We have met Krampus, the wild beast. We have met Hans Trapp, the scarecrow man. But our next entity is something far more complex. She is not just a monster. She is a goddess, fallen from grace, but keeping all of her power. She is known by many names, Spinnstubenfrau, Berchta, but most commonly she is called Frau Perchta. In the depths of winter, specifically during the 12 days of Christmas leading up to the Epiphany on January 6th, she wanders the countryside. But unlike the other monsters who hide in the shadows, Perchta has two faces. Sometimes she appears as a woman of blinding beauty. Dressed in white, glowing like the fresh snow under a full moon, she looks like a queen of heaven. In this form, she is the guardian of the beasts and the protector of the household. But that is not the face you are likely to see if you have been lazy. If you have displeased her, she appears as an old, withered hag. Her nose is long and hooked like a beak. Her skin is wrinkled like dry parchment. Her clothes are ragged, tattered grey rags, but smell of dust and age. And hidden beneath those rags she carries a long, sharp knife. Perchta is the obsession with order taken to a lethal extreme. She is the patroness of spinning, just like the Yule Cat legend suggests. The processing of wool was vital. But Perchta doesn't just check if you finished your work. She checks if your house is clean. She checks if your servants have been fed. She checks if you have lived a life of discipline. She is a domestic terror, a monster that haunts the very heart of the home. She enters without a sound, drifting through locked doors to inspect the work of the women and children. If she finds the flax spun, the floors swept, and the house in order, she might leave a silver coin in a shoe, a small, silent blessing. But if she finds the spinning wheel covered in dust or the flax tangled and unfinished, her punishment is one of the most specific and gruesome in all of folklore.
The legend of Frau Perchta is famous for its visceral, surgical cruelty. She does not drag you away to a cave. She does not beat you with birch branches. She performs a procedure. The story goes that if a servant or a child was lazy, Perchta would wait until they fell asleep. Then she would creep to their bedside, pull back the covers, and use her long knife to slit open their belly. She would remove their stomach and entrails, emptying them out completely. And in their place, she would stuff the body with straw, rocks, and garbage. She would then sew the victim back up using a rough iron needle and leave them there. It is a horrifying image, a literal cleaning out of the lazy person. You were filled with emptiness, so she filled you with trash.
But Perchta had another rule, one that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with diet. On the eve of the Epiphany, it was tradition to eat a specific meal, usually a fish and gruel dish or dumplings. This was a fast day, a day of simple, humble food. If Perchta entered a house and found that the family had eaten something rich, something gluttonous, instead of the traditional humble meal, she would inflict the same punishment. She would cut open their full bellies, take the rich food back, and fill them with stones. This created a terrifying atmosphere around the dinner table on January 5th. Everyone ate their gruel. Everyone scraped their bowls clean, not out of hunger, but out of self-preservation. You had to prove to the invisible witch standing in the corner that you were humble, that you were disciplined. It turns the act of eating, usually a comfort in winter, into a high-stakes test of character.
Despite this horror, Perchta is still celebrated today in the Perchtlauf processions of the Alpine regions. In these parades, you see the duality of her nature. There are the schön Perchten, the beautiful Perchten, wearing tall, elaborate headdresses adorned with flowers and ribbons, representing the light and the coming spring. And walking beside them are the Schjach Perchten, the ugly Perchten. These figures wear hideous, twisted masks with tusks and horns, ringing heavy bells to drive away the demons of winter. It is a battle between beauty and ugliness, order and chaos, and presiding over it all is Perchta, the goddess who holds the knife. She reminds us that winter is a time of judgment. The cold strips away the excess. Nature itself cuts away the dead wood to make room for the new. Perchta is simply that natural law given a human face. She cleans the world, one belly at a time. But as frightening as a knife-wielding witch might be, she is still recognizable. She has a face. She has rules. Our next monster has no face. It has no rules. It has no body, save for the bleached bones of a dead animal. We leave the mountains of Austria and cross the Channel to the dark, rain-soaked hills of Wales. Here, the Christmas season brings a visitor to your door that demands a battle, not of swords, but of wits. And if you lose, this skeletal nightmare comes inside to drink your beer. Prepare yourselves for the rattle of bones and the clacking of jaws. We are about to meet the Mari Lwyd.
We leave the high peaks of the continent and cross the grey, choppy waters to the ancient hills of Wales. Here, winter does not always mean deep snow. It often means rain, mist, and a damp chill that settles into your very bones. Nights of midwinter that you might hear a sound at your window. Not a knock, but a clatter, like dry stones hitting together, or perhaps teeth snapping shut. You pull back the curtain, expecting a neighbor, but instead you are staring face to face with a skull. This is the Mari Lwyd, the grey mare. Of all the winter monsters, the Mari Lwyd is perhaps the most visually surreal. It is not a story told to children to make them behave. It is a physical presence that visits your home. The figure is constructed from the skull of a horse, a real bleached bone skull dug up from the earth. Its eyes are often replaced
with baubles or pieces of green glass, giving it a dead, unblinking stare. Its jaws are spring-loaded, rigged with wire, so that the operator can make them snap shut with a loud, unnerving crack. From the back of the skull, a white sheet hangs down, draping the body of the person carrying it, turning them into a ghostly, headless spectre. Coloured ribbons and bells are attached to the bone, a strange mix of festivity and death. Imagine sitting in your warm living room, safe and comfortable, and suddenly this thing appears in the glass, a dead horse dressed in ribbons, snapping its jaws at you. It doesn't attack, it doesn't growl, it sings.
The tradition of the Mari Lwyd is one of the strangest rituals in the British Isles. It is a form of wassailing or door-to-door singing, but with a confrontational twist. A group of men leading the skeletal horse will approach a house. They knock on the door and begin to sing verses. But they aren't singing carols, they are singing challenges. They are insulting the homeowners, mocking their house, demanding entry. This begins the punko, a battle of wits. The people inside the house must sing back. They must come up with rhymes to refuse entry, to outwit the horse, to defend their home with poetry. It is a rap battle played out between the living and the dead. "Let us in, your beer is sour," the horse might sing. "Go away, the wind is cold and our fire is low," the homeowner replies. This back and forth continues, sometimes for an hour, the horse snapping its jaws, the bells jingling, the voices rising in the dark street. Whatever you do, you must not run out of rhymes. If the homeowner fails to reply or stumbles over their words, the Mari Lwyd wins. And if the horse wins, the door must be opened. The skeleton enters your home. It runs around the room, snapping at the children, chasing the women, creating chaos and fear. It is a terrifying intruder, a symbol of death invading the domestic space. But once inside, the tone changes. The group is given food and ale. The monster drinks with you, and the fear dissolves into hospitality.
Scholars debate what the Mari Lwyd truly represents. Some say it is a remnant of pre-Christian horse worship, a goddess of fertility. Others say it is simply death itself, trying to find a place by the fire during the cold months. There is something deeply unsettling about the visual. A skull decorated like a party guest, it creates cognitive dissonance. It is dead, yet it is singing. It is scary, yet it brings luck. For the Welsh, allowing the Mari Lwyd inside was supposed to bring good fortune for the coming year. It was a way of making peace with the darkness. You invite the skeleton in, you feed it, and hopefully it leaves you alone when spring comes. It is a reminder that in the deep winter, the barrier between the living and the dead is permeable. And sometimes you just have to invite the ghosts in for a drink. But not all visitors are so easily placated with a rhyme and a beer. Some visitors do not want to sing. They want to work. We leave the poetic hills of Wales and return to the heart of France, to a legend that is perhaps the darkest of them all. Most of our monsters so far have been creatures or spirits, but our next subject
is a human, a butcher, who committed a crime so heinous that he was cursed to walk the earth forever as the servant of Saint Nicholas. He is the man with the whip, the dark shadow of the French Christmas. His name is Père Fouettard.
We cross the border from Germany back into France, specifically to the regions of Lorraine and Alsace. Here, the legend of the Dark Companion takes its most gruesome turn. We have seen monsters born of nature and men turned into scarecrows. But the story of Père Fouettard, the whipping father, begins with a crime so shocking that it feels less like a folklore and more like a true crime horror story from the Middle Ages. The legend starts not with a monster, but with 3 children. The story goes that 3 young boys, usually described as wealthy, or perhaps sons of nobility, were wandering home from boarding school. They lost their way in the deep, darkening woods. As the cold set in and the wolves began to howl, they saw a light in the distance. It was a butcher's shop, or perhaps an inn run by a butcher. Relieved, the boys knocked on the door, asking for shelter and warmth for the night. The butcher, a man named Pierre, opened the door. He saw the boys. He saw their fine clothes, and he saw an opportunity. He invited them in, sat them by the fire, and gave them food. But Pierre had no intention of helping them. Driven by greed, or perhaps a dark, twisted hunger, he waited until they were asleep. Then he killed them. But murder wasn't enough. In a detail that has terrified French children for centuries, the butcher didn't just hide the bodies. He dragged them down to his cellar, chopped them into pieces, and threw them into a massive salting vat, a barrel filled with brine intended for curing pork. He planned to sell them as meat. For 7 years, the boys remained in the barrel, pickled, forgotten, hidden in the dark. The butcher continued his trade, believing he had gotten away with the perfect crime. But he forgot that someone is always watching.
7 years later, a tall, thin man knocked on the butcher's door. He was dressed in the red robes of a bishop, carrying a golden staff. It was Saint Nicholas, travelling through the region. The butcher, not realizing who stood before him, panicked but tried to play the host. He invited the bishop in, offering him the finest cuts of ham. "I do not want ham," Saint Nicholas said. The butcher offered him veal. "I do not want veal," the saint replied. His voice was calm, but heavy with judgment. "I want the salted meat," Nicholas said, pointing a long finger toward the cellar door. "The meat that has been in the barrel for 7 years. The butcher turned pale. He knew instantly that his secret was out. He tried to run, but his legs failed him. He collapsed to his knees, begging for mercy. Saint Nicholas descended the stairs to the cellar. He approached the salting vat. He raised 3 fingers and commanded the children to rise.
In a miracle of divine power, the lid of the barrel flew open. The three boys, whole and unharmed, woke up. They stretched and yawned as if they had simply been sleeping through a long, strange dream. "I slept well," the first one said. "I slept better," the second one said. The butcher, Pierre, cowered in the corner. He expected death. He expected hellfire. But St. Nicholas had a different punishment in mind. He did not kill the butcher. He enslaved him. He declared that from this day forward Pierre would serve him. He would travel the world at the saint's side. But while Nicholas would bring joy and gifts, Pierre would bring punishment. He would become the shadow of the saint, the eternal reminder of what happens to the wicked. He became Père Fouettard.
Today, in the parades of northern France, Père Fouettard is a terrifying figure to behold. He walks behind the benevolent St. Nicholas, dressed in dirty, dark robes. His face is blackened with soot and coal, representing the darkness of his soul, or perhaps the grime of the chimney. He has a long, wild beard, not white like the saints, but black and tangled. In his hand he carries a whip or a bundle of sticks. While Nicholas hands out chocolates and gingerbread, Père Fouettard hands out coal, potatoes, or a lash of the whip. He scowls at the crowd, growling at children who have been disobedient. There is a deep psychological horror to this character. He is not a demon born of fire. He is a human murderer, redeemed only by servitude. He represents the idea that sin cannot be erased, only repurposed. He is forced to walk in the light of the saint, but he must always remain in the dark, carrying the tools of pain. It is a grim lesson for a holiday. Even forgiveness has a price. We leave the blood-stained history of France and travel to the rural communities of Germany, and eventually across the ocean to the early settlements of America. Our next monster is not a butcher. He is a wild man of the woods. He does not carry a whip. He carries a switch. And he has a very strange habit of tapping on your window weeks before Christmas even arrives. He is the figure that scares you just a little bit before giving you a treat. A chaotic mix of threat and generosity. Our next visitor is Belsnickel.
We leave the bloody history of the French butcher and travel to the rural, isolated farmhouses of the German Rhineland, and later the snowy settlements of Pennsylvania in America. Here, the fear isn't about being boiled or eaten, it is about being tested. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, when the nights are at their longest, the silence of the countryside is absolute. But if you sit by the fire, listening to the wind, you might hear something disturb that silence. A sharp, rhythmic tapping on the window pane. Tap, tap, tap. It is not the wind, it is a warning. Looking through the frosted glass, you might see a hunched figure standing in the snow. He is dressed in furs, but they are ragged and dirty. His face is blackened with soot or hidden behind a grotesque mask. He carries a bag in one hand and a long, thin switch in the other. This is Belsnickel. Unlike St. Nicholas, who is a distant, bishop-like figure of grace, Belsnickel is earthy. He is wild. He is the fur-clad Nicholas, a creature of the forest who bridges the gap between civilization and nature.
And unlike the other monsters who come on Christmas Eve, Belsnickel comes early. He visits weeks before the holiday, a chaotic precursor to the main event. He is the final exam before the semester ends. He doesn't slide down the chimney, he stomps through the front door. He is loud, he is aggressive, and he brings with him an overwhelming scent of cold air, dirt, and judgment. Children in Pennsylvania Dutch communities grew up fearing this sound. When the tapping started, they knew the test had begun. Belsnickel would enter the house, often played by a neighbor or an uncle in disguise, creating a terrifying, immersive theater in the living room. He would glare at the children with wild eyes. "Have you been dutiful?" he would bark. "Have you worked hard?" But words were not enough for Belsnickel. He required proof.
The encounter with Belsnickel is a psychological trap, a game of instinct versus discipline. After interrogating the children, asking them to recite Bible verses or multiplication tables, he would reach into his bag, but he wouldn't hand them a gift. Instead, he would take a handful of candies, nuts or small cakes and throw them onto the floor. Scatter. The sweets would skid across the wooden floorboards, landing at the children's feet. Now, imagine the instinct of a child. You see candy, you want it. The urge is to dive, to scramble, to grab as much as you can before someone else gets it. But that is the trap. If the children lunged for the candy greedily, fighting each other, Belsnickel would strike. His switch would come down, whipping their backs and their hands. "Greed!" he would shout. "Impatience!" The lesson was cruel, but effective. You could have the reward, but only if you waited, only if you showed restraint. The good child was the one who stood still, who waited for permission, who picked up the candy with dignity. Belsnickel was teaching them that desire must be controlled. In the harsh winters of the early settlements, resources were precious. If everyone grabbed for the food at once, chaos would ensue. Belsnickel was the enforcer of civilized sharing. He represents a very specific kind of anxiety, the fear of being watched when you think you are safe. He taps on the window to let you know he's out there. He throws the candy to see who you really are when your guard is down. He is a trickster figure, scary, but ultimately benevolent, provided you pass his test.
As German immigrants moved to America, the legend of Belsnickel travelled with them. But over time, he began to fade. The edges of his character were sanded down. The furs became red velvet. The soot was washed away. The switch was lost. Slowly, the wild, dirty Belsnickel merged with the saintly Nicholas and evolved into the modern Santa Claus. But if you look closely at the history of Santa, you can still see the shadow of Belsnickel. The idea that he knows when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. The idea of the list, the judgment. Santa Claus is a sanitized version of this wild man. We kept the gifts, but we forgot the switch. We forgot the tapping at the window. But there is one final entity we must meet, one that refuses to be sanitized. We head north again, to the deep, snowy forests of Scandinavia, to Sweden and Norway. Here the symbol of Christmas isn't a big man in a sleigh. It is a tiny, bearded creature, a gnome. To modern eyes, he looks adorable. He looks like a garden ornament, or a helper in a Christmas movie. But do not be deceived. This little old man is not a helper. He is the master of the farm. And if you forget to feed him his Christmas porridge, he won't just leave you coal. He will kill your livestock, burn down your barn, and leave you to freeze in the snow. Our final monster is the vengeful ancestor, the ruler of the homestead. He is the Nisse. We reach the end of our journey in the deep, silent forests of Scandinavia, in the snow-covered farmsteads of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Here, the winter is not just a season, it is a ruler. And to survive it, you need help. In modern Christmas culture, we are used to the image of the elf, the happy, tiny worker who builds toys for Santa in a workshop. He is subservient, he is cheerful, he exists only to serve. But the Nordic people know the truth. The little man with the white beard and the red hat is not a servant. He is the master. He is the Nisse, or in Sweden, the Tomte. Physically, he looks harmless. He is described as being no taller than a child, often just 3 feet high. He has a long grey beard that drags on the floor, and he wears a pointed red cap. If you saw him in a garden today, you would call him a gnome. But in the folklore of the 18th and 19th centuries, the Nisse was a figure of immense spiritual power. He was not a magical creature that just appeared. Many believed he was the spirit of the farm's first owner, the ancestor who cleared the land, the bonde who built the first house. Even in death he refused to leave. He stayed behind to watch over his legacy. He lived in the hayloft or under the floorboards of the barn. During the year, he was a guardian. If the farmer was hard-working and respectful, the Nisse would help. He would calm the horses during a storm. He would guide a lost sheep back to the fold, and he would ensure the harvest was plentiful. But he had a temper. The Nisse was notoriously sensitive. He demanded respect. He hated loud noises. He hated changes to the way things were done, and he absolutely hated rudeness. If you offended him, he wouldn't just stop helping. He would start destroying. He had the strength of 10 men. He could toss a grown farmer across the yard with one hand. He could tie the cows' tails together, turn the milk sour, or break the wheels of the cart. But on Christmas Eve, the stakes were higher than simple mischief. On this night, the Nisse expected his payment.
The tradition was non-negotiable. On Christmas Eve, the farmer had to take a bowl of porridge known as Yule Grut up to the barn or the hayloft. This wasn't just any porridge. It had to be the best the farm could produce, rich, creamy, made with expensive ingredients, and most importantly, it had to be topped with a large, generous pat of butter. This was the peace offering, the rent payment to the ghost in the barn. There is a famous and dark folk tale that illustrates just how dangerous a disappointed Nisse could be. One Christmas Eve, a poor farmer's wife prepared the porridge. She was kind-hearted, but she wanted to keep the butter warm so it would melt deliciously into the oats. So she hid the butter at the very bottom of the bowl, underneath the hot porridge. She placed the bowl in the barn and left. The Nisse emerged from the shadows. He looked at the bowl. He saw the steam. He smelled the oats. But he did not see the butter.
he flew into a blind rage. He believed the farmer had cheaped out, that he had been disrespected after a year of hard work. In his fury, he marched into the stable, found the farmer's best, most valuable dairy cow, and snapped its neck. He killed the animal instantly, destroying the family's livelihood in a single moment of spite. Satisfied with his revenge, he sat down to eat the porridge, planning to leave the empty bowl as a final insult. He ate the first few spoonfuls, and then he reached the bottom. He found the melted butter. The realization hit him. The farmer hadn't cheated him. The butter was there all along. The Nissie felt a pang of regret. He looked at the dead cow. He looked at the porridge. Being a creature of practical magic, he decided to fix it. But he didn't resurrect the cow. That wasn't his way. Instead, he walked to the neighbour's farm, stole their best cow, and led it back to his own barn to replace the one he had killed. This is the morality of the Nissie. He is loyal only to his farm. He is a protector, but a tyrant. He demands perfection, and his justice is swift, brutal, and often unfair to everyone else.
The Nis, like all the monsters we have met tonight, is a reminder of a simpler, harder time. When we look back at these legends, Krampus with his chains, Grýla with her sack, Perkta with her knife, and the Nis with his dead cow, we see a pattern. We see a world where winter was terrifying. It was dark, it was cold, and survival was not guaranteed. These monsters weren't invented just to scare children for fun. They were tools of survival. They enforced the rules that kept the community alive. Work hard, or the Yule Cat will eat you. Be clean, or Perkta will cut you. Share your food, or Belsnickel will whip you. Respect your ancestors, or the Nis will ruin you. They gave a face to the anxiety of the season. They turned the abstract fear of starvation and death into something you could see, something you could name, and something you could perhaps appease with a bowl of porridge. Today, our winters are warmer. Our nights are lit by electric lights. The monsters have retreated to the pages of history books and the screens of movies. But on a quiet night in December, when the wind is howling against the glass and the snow is falling thick and fast, it is easy to imagine them out there, still, waiting in the shadows, watching to see if we have been good. So, this Christmas, enjoy your gifts, eat your dinner, but maybe, just to be safe, leave a little extra butter on the porridge. This is the historian, keeping watch. Sleep well.